I declare this meeting of the Planning Committee of the City of Port Phillip open. Excuse me. We've got a formal meeting happening here. I declare this meeting of the Planning Committee of the Port Phillip City Council open, and I welcome the members of the public who are here tonight. The City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledges the Yalukit Willem clan of the Munro. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. We acknowledge and uphold their continuing relationship with this land. Council has a local law that determines how this meeting will be conducted. There's a time allotted in tonight's agenda for public question time. That's one thing. There's also an opportunity for members of the public to ask a question or make a comment on a specific item on tonight's agenda. This will be done prior to the committee considering that item. If you wish to ask a question or speak to a report, please complete the blue form, which I think lots of you have, on the table just outside the chamber, and hand it to a staff member. And if you have already registered online, please ensure that you let a staff member know you are present. I encourage you to try to limit your questions and comments to around 3 minutes, and I will limit to around that myself, and to try and avoid repeating any points that have been made previously by other speakers. This committee can only address questions and deal with items within its delegation, which is planning matters. All planning committee meetings have live streaming cameras to allow the community to watch and listen to meetings in real time. Please note that under Council's local laws, this meeting cannot be filmed or audio taped unless permission is granted by the chair. That's me. In the unlikely event of an emergency evacuation, please follow the instructions of the emergency warden, who is on my right, Monica, Rebecca. I know we've been in council for almost as long as each other. Okay, apologies. Do we have any apologies?
Councillor Marcus Pearl.
Councillor Pearl.
I'd like to move. Here's an apology.
You can. Well, all those in favour? Second. All right, we've got to do the whole thing. It doesn't say so here, but anyway. Moved. Councillor. I remember. Councillor Gross seconded. Councillor Voss. It rhymes. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Minutes of the previous meeting. Councillors, the minutes of the Planning Committee meeting held on the 11th of December, that's a long time ago, in 2019 have been circulated. Are there any questions regarding these minutes? If not, can I have a motion to confirm these minutes? Councillor Gross moved. Councillor Voss seconded. I like the combo. Moved Councillor Gross, seconded Councillor Voss. I'll now put it to the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Declarations of conflicts of interest. Does any councillor have a conflict of interest in a matter being discussed at tonight's meeting? No? Good. Public question time. We have one person who has requested to ask a question tonight, and I'll now call on Craig Eyes to come forward. Craig, when you sit down, can you turn the mic on and state your name and suburb for the record? Is the little light on there?
The light is on.
Excellent.
Craig Eyes from Powerhouse Rugby Club in Albert Park, and appreciate the opportunity to ask a couple of questions for you. If you get down to Albert Park, you'll see lot of big boys and ladies running around playing rugby on Saturdays, and occasionally some of the children. Powerhouse Rugby Club has been in Albert Park for about 90 years, and part of Lord Somers Camp and Powerhouse that you might know. We're planning to construct a new sports pavilion as the women's team currently gets changed on the sideline. There's no toilets, no shower facilities, no shelter available for this winter sport. Our rugby club has raised $700,000 and Sport and Rec providing $300,000 towards a $1.5 million pavilion. Parks Victoria have advised that a planning permit will be needed to be applied for to the council, even though we do have a gazetted lease agreement from state government. City of Port Phillip provided $100,000 to South Melbourne District Sports Club for their new pavilion a few years ago. One question I have is what financial support is available for this project? We've been talking to a sports department in council for about 10 years and they said, look, there's not much chance of getting money. It takes about 10 years to get it. We're now up to our 10th year, so we're going to be knocking on the door a bit more. So that's one question. And the second question is there a charge for a planning permit for a not-for-profit sports organisation? And will council make us pay for that planning application? So that's my two questions. Thanks for your time.
Okay, thank you very much. Craig, the first question is not a planning question, it's actually a general question of budget and priorities and what have you, and we're not equipped to answer that question, but we will pass it on, take it on notice, and pass it on, and somebody will get back to you to talk about that. I'm sorry. I am relying on what I said about 5 minutes ago or 2 minutes ago. But it is this is a planning committee. When we only deal with things under the planning scheme.
It was a rhetorical question.
So, well, you've done a good job with it. We will take it on, Councillor Voss.
Through you, Chair, if I'd just like to say that I had a meeting with Tim, the CEO, and Carly last week, and I did outline to them methods and ways about accessing funds. So, yeah, just to let you know.
So just to be clear, so we're separate from Lord Somers Camp. So we're building our own pavilion on close to Canterbury Roadside near the light rail, not the big Lord Somers Camp pavilion. Yeah.
Okay. That big question we're going to shunt aside, and somebody will follow that up and get back to you on it, but we can't do that in this one. But the second question is a planning question. Is there a planning fee attached to that? And I defer to you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, unless it can be proven that the application relates to land used exclusively for charitable purposes, a planning fee is normally required under the Planning and Environment Act. So we're required to do that. And the planning fee is dependent upon the cost of the development. So normally exemptions aren't provided for planning applications. We can once again look at this a bit further at a later date and provide you with additional information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Councillor Gross.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I used to play rugby against Powerhouse and I was never not scared.
Come on down.
It was terrifying.
Good. Enough of anecdotes. Thank you. Okay. Councillor question time. Councillor, are there any questions for officers? Councillor Voss.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask a question of the officers around the VCAT appeals and how many of our appeals, say, in the last 12 months have been upheld. What's our percentage? And if there's any other commentary around that, I wouldn't mind understanding, I guess, where we're sitting in terms of our success rates or otherwise.
Mr Borg.
Through you, Mr Chairman. We do get measured in terms of our appeal success rate through the local government planning reporting framework. Now, unfortunately, the local government planning reporting framework only deals with 4 types of appeals. So that's usually refusals, conditions, failures, and it doesn't consider all the other types of appeals. Based on the local government reporting framework for the last financial year, we were at 72%. We do say, though, because we mediate outcomes, we also get applications withdrawn. So if we go to a compulsory conference and receive a successful outcome, we see that as a win and not a loss. If we include those in those numbers, so we add to those, it takes us to about 87.5%. So essentially nearly 9 out of 10 of our decisions are upheld at VCAT. In the last 6 months, we've also been appraised, and at the moment, even without adding the withdrawn appeals and the mediated outcomes, we're at 87%. If we added those, we'd be in the high 90s. So we're doing very well. Compared to the metro average, it's about 52%. So including our inner Melbourne councils as well.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from councillors? Okay, we'll move on to the presentation of reports. We've got 4 items before us. I'm going to put item 6.2 to the end, which is the Statutory Planning Delegated Decisions Report, which nobody else wants to hear about. So we'll start with item 6.1, which is 21 to 23 William Street, Balaclava, and we have a list of people here to make a report, to make a presentation. We're going to take, I think, the 3 people who are representing a group first and combine you into a triple presentation. Is that okay? This is Mr. David Bursteiner, Dalit Kaplan, and one other, I believe. I don't know which other.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. David Burstein is my name, Dalit Kaplan and Heath Martin. Heath will not be speaking. Dalit and I are speaking on behalf of... Sure. Dalit and I are speaking on behalf of roughly 10 homeowners and residents from Westbury Close and 2 shops in the Carlisle Street area. So it's important there are traders among us as well. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Can I just stop you before we start? I was considering we're combining you into 3 minutes, but if there's a non-speaker, that is just a little bit strange to give you extra space, extra time for a person who wasn't going to speak at all.
Who wasn't going to speak?
Heath? Martin?
Heath, yes. I don't understand what the problem is.
Technically, you're 2 speakers, and you're representing a group. I'm very happy to give you 6 minutes between you, and I'm happy to extend it a bit further than that.
Thank you. Why don't we see how we go? But there are 10 of us, so
yes,
we thought if we could be half of 30 minutes, we're still
But
safe.
regularly people make speeches on behalf of other people. But I want to hear what you've got to say. There's no question about that.
Let's get into it. There are 6 things. I'll try and move at 1,000,000 miles an hour to keep it short. There are 6 things I'm going to talk about. I'll quickly walk through some of the things we already know: the location of the William Street site, the heritage context, what this particular industrial zone means. I'm going to walk through what's proposed to go there, what should go there, a bit about the heritage, the traffic, and the council planner's report. So where is it? There. Next slide, please. Actually, the first slide. That's my entrance slide. No unreasonable visual bulk is what's stated in the council report. What's unreasonable is a little subjective. Certainly we would say that the only 8-storey building, when there's nothing for miles around it, is at its face unreasonable. But next slide, please. So this site is not your bog standard industrial site. You can see the little blue square. The red and the green denotes heritage. Red is significant, green is contributing. What you see straight away is that it's smack bang in the middle of significant heritage areas, which is not much of a surprise for our area, for Balaclava. That tiny little strip is what's called Industrial 3. It's critical. Maybe the most important thing I'm going to say is that Industrial 3 is not 2 or 1. The state planning scheme provides that Industrial 3 is to provide a buffer between Industrial Zone 1 and 2 and local communities, allows for industries and associated uses compatible with the nearby community, to ensure that uses do not affect the safety and amenity of adjacent, more sensitive land uses. So it's immediately apparent that the impact on the heritage communities around it is up for consideration. The zone is a tool to provide a contextual and responsive to sensitive areas proposal. And in this one, we would say that the particular area befits a proposal that doesn't dominate the skyline or interrupt vistas with heritage buildings. To be comprehensive, I'll just add that this review is a few weeks old. This is the latest one. Next slide, please. So the entire framework, as it exists today, for what can go there is boils back to the Carlisle Street Activity Centre Structure Plan. It's a bit small to read, so I won't read all of it, but hit some of the touch points. A key one is that the outcome of the structure plan and the urban design framework which goes with it is that, and these are now getting on 10 years old, is that there was to be, and they say, they flag the need to prepare and incorporate a design and development overlay into the Port Phillip planning scheme for William Street. They talk about in the 5 to 10 years, and remembering at the end of that now, the need to further investigate and review the land use options and ensure future investigations consider the potential for future development of up to 5 stories. And remember, we're talking about 8 here along the western side. So I've just flagged what was supposed to happen. The other thing was, within this activity centre, the plan was to enable moderate change on sites outside the heritage overlay. Now, that's what was supposed to happen. They were supposed to provide, again, this is a direct quote, opportunities for new development at 3 to 4 stories. Next slide, please. So now we're on to the Carlisle Street Urban Design Framework, which goes with the document I just mentioned. It's pretty clear from what it says up there. It provides, not my words, council's words, buildings on the western side of William Street should not exceed a maximum height of 16 metres, 5 stories. For Precinct 4, which is William Street, pure office uses are discouraged. And the built form is to ensure new development retains and enhances the built form character and cultural heritage. So that is the framework that exists now. It's long in the tooth, but for reasons unknown to the residents, council or nobody else has developed anything new. So we sit here today with nothing new developed, no strategic framework, and then a developer comes along and says, I want to put something that's 8 stories. It says 5 over there. Next slide, please.
Can I just tell you, you're 4.5 minutes into this.
Okay. I don't think anybody could accuse me of speaking slowly. So that's the site now. Next slide, please. 2 slides, 10 seconds. So that's what we're looking at, that big black... that big black box there. That's what it looks like. That's the size. You can see there's nothing around. The only thing that comes close is you can see the Rialto and a whole bunch of other buildings in the distance. Now, what the developer says in the developer's own application is that a catalyst for future redevelopment within the William Street precinct. Next slide, please. So is that what we're going for? Imagine we get this one through. Now, lest there be any doubt that that's what's going to happen next, can I have the next slide, please? On the right side, you see a diagram from Council's material just now showing supporters and opposers. You see the only supporters are the little blue dots. You can't see them very well from here, but they're the ones also on William Street. It's a bit of a flag as to who thinks it's a good idea, and you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out why they think it's a good idea. So if anybody says that thinks that this building, if it goes through, won't herald something along those lines, respectfully, they're kidding themselves. Next slide, please. So now I'm on to the heritage. So our street, the residence I speak for, is right behind the building, one street parallel. All of us who've developed our homes have had to jump through a number of hoops for heritage reasons. The reasoning is, and there's a quote there on my application for my house, that's my house right in the middle, it says, the Council's Heritage Advisor points out that one of the reasons for this heritage is the cohesive streetscape. Now, it is so sensitive that you see on the bottom left, my house, that little box at the left. We weren't allowed to do that to protect this phenomenally important streetscape. Next slide, please. But that, you can see at the back, that's what we're going to get. So those few centimetres not allowed. But this, apparently, makes a complete mock... It really does make a complete mockery of the entire heritage zone. And I'm not embarrassed to say... that my house there, if it was somewhere else, this is in Coburg, or not to diminish Coburg, by itself, it has no significance. Its only significance is there's a bunch of them and they've got a lovely streetscape. Let's jump over the next slide for Councillor Brand.
We're past 7 minutes now.
Next slide again. We're 35% of allowed parking. It's going to kill traffic in Carlisle Street. The report itself of council, not the applicant, says there's very limited availability for parking. I don't think I need to convince anybody in the room about the fact that we need more car parking, not less, and to give a free ride to the developer seems outrageous. Next slide, please. What are we up to? I would have liked to have gone through the council planning report and provide some of the reasons it just does not stack up. It's a whole bunch of... it reads repeatedly like this. Well, it doesn't meet our guidelines, our very own guidelines, but we're going to allow it because. The last one is probably the most important one. That little box is straight out of the report which came out on Friday, and it points out that the framework says that buildings on the western side should not exceed a maximum height of 16 metres. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but I know 32.5 metres is a hell of a lot bigger than 16, and it just says, well, it's going to be bigger.
David, are you going to have another speaker because we're up to about 9 minutes now?
Okay, next slide then is my last slide.
I'd like you to start finishing.
So ultimately what we say is council should reject the application, council should do its work and develop a long-term strategy for William Street and then look at what it's going to do, not the other way round, so that it has a look in 3 years' time and says we should only allow 4 or 5 stories and the horse is bolted, and council should oppose it VCAT. The only reason I put that last slide there is that is a direct lift. That page is from the Carlisle Street Urban Framework. It is the iconic Lady of St Kilda. We will see in that skyline, in that very skyline, we will see this development. I appreciate another few minutes. I know that I've spoken for 10 minutes.
You need to,
but
this is
a matter of great significance, and there are 13 homeowners here.
I understand, but there are rules that this meeting goes by, and we do have to. You need to wind up now.
I'm wound up, Delete.
Hi, Councillor. Just a few points. Can I be heard? Just a few points to add and to reiterate without repeating. Firstly, my name's Delegated Kaplan. I also live on Westbury Close. I think that, firstly, just to emphasise...
Can you make them dot points? I mean, really,
we've just... I think that it feels unfair for the developers to reap the benefits of the investment that we've all made, financial and emotional, to conform to the very strict requirements that have been put in place by the council when we've all done our small developments. I've, for one, spent over, I think, $900 a day repointing the facade of my property, and it feels that there's a lack of reciprocity if this developer is then going to go in and build something that undermines the quality of what's being done. So it's really a sense of justice and fairness, and that we're all being treated equally by the council. And
I'm going to wind you up.
And then just and I believe that we should all be held to the same high standards as with respect to respecting this. I just want to state that we're not anti-development. We are excited by the prospect of building and developing the area, and we're excited by the leadership that the developers can take in forming this next era of St Kilda. We're very excited by that, but we feel that 8 is an excessive number, and we hope you consider that.
That is a good wind-up. Thank you very much. Okay. Now we have Elizabeth Sylvester. Elizabeth, I don't think you're Elizabeth Sylvester, unless I'm mistaken.
Your powers of observation are very good.
Well, I don't want to be, sort of presumptuous, but yes.
My wife is a government employee. She's on her way here. She hasn't arrived yet.
All right.
But I'm also listed as a speaker.
You're okay, and you're Bill Sylvester. Okay,
Correct.
I got that part right. Go ahead.
Okay. Firstly, before I start, can I ask why is there such a short time limit for people like myself representing the community of 3 minutes when the developers and so on have months to prepare their submissions to you?
The developers don't have longer to speak at this meeting. This is a summing up meeting of all of the consultation which has been going on for months and months, and this is just summing up just to make the points. We have to make decisions now. There's other stuff on the agenda. We often go till after midnight, and we need to contain these points.
All right, well, thanks for that explanation. I certainly don't want to be here till midnight. I just also want to clarify, because I've only recently, as have many other people in William Street, become aware of this development. Is the current proposal that the council intends to recommend that this 8-storey building goes ahead and therefore supports the submission that's been put through to VCAT?
The officer's recommendations have been published.
That's
already.
the officer's recommendation.
Yes, and we need to debate and make our decision tonight.
Right. Thank you. Well, look, I've got a number of things to cover, but the first thing I'd like to bring to your attention is I've been living in William Street for 3 years now. I only became aware of this development a few days ago. It was brought to my attention by another resident in William Street that the sign indicating this development was only put up just before Christmas, was up for a very short period of time, and most people who are away really didn't have any opportunity to become aware of this. So one of the first points I'd like to make is that we don't believe that the council is in a position to make a decision on this when it hasn't conducted adequate public consultation. To support that, we've gathered the evidence that I've been personally to most residences in William Street in the last few days and asked people whether they were aware of this development at all. And in fact, they've all indicated they haven't been. And so I've prepared, it's not a petition, it's a legal declaration of understanding here. This document reads as follows: attention to the City of Port Phillip Planning Committee. We, the undersigned residents of William Street, Balaclava, hereby declare that we have not received any information prior to February 2020 regarding the proposed development of 21 to 23 William Street, Balaclava as an 8-storey development. I have signatures, dates, names and addresses. I have 32 names and addresses here. All these people not only indicating they weren't aware of it, but they are all objecting to this development. I've just gathered these in the last 24 hours once I became aware of this due to information being sent to me. So the first point we'd like to make, this is the original. I'd like to hang on to the original, but you're welcome to have a copy of this. That public consultation by either the developer or, in the absence of the developer, by the council has not been undertaken, and we believe proper local public consultation should be undertaken before you make a decision of recommending this to VCAT.
Can you make sure you give that? Well, somehow we need to get a copy of that.
Absolutely. I'm happy to hand that over for a copy to be made now if you wish.
Excuse me, just no comments from the gallery at the moment. It's a formal meeting, and we've got to do it by the rules.
No, as I said, my wife's on her way here. I'm hoping she does get here, but she, in her recent employment before she started working for Treasury, is that she has previously been leading the environmental and planning review of the Westgate Tunnel. Is probably one of the leading experts on planning and environment here in Victoria. She's hoping to get here to speak, but if she doesn't get here, I can make some comments on her behalf.
Your time is now pretty much up, so...
What I would request is if she gets here after you've moved on to the other developments to be discussed, that she would have a few minutes to make some points.
I don't think that's possible, but we can certainly still, in some way, incorporate what... She can come and talk to the officers or to the councillors separately,
Right.
but we will make a decision
So the other
tonight.
few points I wanted to make was that the concern about this...
I think we need to... I mean, this is now we're into, 4 minutes, and it's...
Well, I did ask you a few questions. I'm sure you wouldn't want my question time to erode
Excuse
into my
me,
three...
I answered your questions, and I didn't even start the clock until I finished answering them, so you just need to wind up very quickly.
All right. Well, look, in summary, we don't believe the council can make a sound planning decision in the absence of sufficient and widespread consultation. We're also concerned that given that this is an industrial site, the mandatory conducting of a odour and air pollution assessment hasn't been done, a noise pollution assessment hasn't been done. The visual impact assessment is misleading in that it doesn't include sufficient comparison or juxtaposition with the surrounding built form. It doesn't provide sufficient data from either the developer or from your staff's recommendations with regard to these things. And so we don't believe that you can make these decisions based on an unreasonable off-site impact assessment.
Thank you very much for that submission, and we hope your wife arrives shortly, but we'll find a way. Now, can I ask, would an officer like to comment on the mail out and the public consultation now, or at the end of the...
Mr. Chair, I'll just flag that I intend to take up those questions when I ask questions of the officers.
Okay, we'll get those questions answered after the submissions are made. Adam Merrington. There's another one, and then there are two of the applicants.
Okay.
Hi, just state your name and suburb and...
Adam Merrington, Balaclava. Address is... Adam Merrington, Balaclava. Address is 1 Penny Lane. This should be less than 3 minutes. Penny Lane is east of this development, and I'm less than 50 metres away, actually facing William Street. I'd like to draw your attention to page 36 of the Planning Committee report. Given how close I am, obviously overshadowing is a big issue for me. The second dot point, overshadowing and loss of light to dwellings on Penny Lane. In italics, properties abutting Penny Lane are industrially zoned. That's actually incorrect. I'm on Penny Lane, my address is 1 Penny Lane, and it's residentially zoned. So in your consultations with the developer and amongst yourselves, I've been left out of any impact. So just like you to take that into account when you're looking at the shadow diagrams, and it shows at 3 p.m. that basically the lane is in darkness, so losing hours and hours. So, yep, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Gillian Upton. State your name and suburb.
Hello, Jill Upton from Balaclava, from Nightingale Street, so around the corner from this development. Okay, so this development is pretending that it's on a main street and in an industrial zone. And indeed, the other buildings that developments it compares itself to in its literature are all on main streets or deep in big industrial zones. But this, of course, is a narrow, struggling William Street. It's so narrow that parking can only be on one side. If there are three of you going abreast on the footpath, one of you's got to go off into the street. And then it finishes in a dangerous, blind dogleg at the end. This street was an anomaly, probably a corrupt rezoning back in the day. It's in a sea of houses. It's in a residential area. And we've had problems with that, but that were resolved with the red scooter, which was next to this development. Okay. I'm interested to hear how hurt and people have been that they've just found out about this. And it's really been a great downfall of the notification and the advertising of the project, that people who will have... I'm representing the Westies here today, the people who are from the west of the railway line. Unofficially, I'm doing that. That their backyards will be so loomed over by this building that you can see into their backyards, into their bedrooms, and they weren't told. Nobody was told. This is just a kind of, as you can see, it's a bit of a flash fire that's happening. And okay, so I was going to talk about some fairly tricky things that are in the development, like, for example, the plan that the council officers have approved, this tall, dark and handsome building here, but when it's sent to VCAT, it suddenly becomes transparent and you can see through to Inkerman Street. It says that the nearest residential houses are 40 metres away. No, well, with a neighbour we stepped it out this morning and they're close, much more like 40 metres away, just diagonally across the street. The developer said that, Red Scooter has no problem with parking, but that's because Red Scooter uses the Richon supermarket car park for parking. But that's going to disappear in this development. So things like that. They're tricky, and so it doesn't, develop trust, does it really? But my final point is that the Carlisle Street Activities Precinct Plan, I'm not sure what its proper name is, but that 16 metres was regarded to be an acceptable level, five stories. And I think you'd find that most of the people who live in Balaclava would accept that. If you want to see what 16 metres looks like, the communications tower on William Street, I believe that's 16 metres, that will give you an idea. It's tall, it stands above, from the west, it stands above the railway line, but it's acceptable with the trees. Here in Balaclava, all we really have is our railway line and the trees. That is our landscape. And we look at it from various views. And now, if you want to see what 8 stories looks like, go down to the corner of Orong Road and Glen Huntley Road and check that out and experience that. Now, the fact that this proposal has been...
I have to ask you to wind up.
Just one more minute, 30 seconds. This has been approved and it's twice 16 metres. It's twice as much as that. Now, for the council to be... the developer said that the plan is old, it's 10 years old, it's obsolete, or he suggests that. If the council's going to approve something that's twice as high, well, that's just ad hocery. And I would say that, yes, the plan is obsolete and we need a new plan and we need a thorough consultative plan for William Street, Balaclava. It will include transport, it will include... we'd probably have to open William Street again. We need a global plan for the area. If this goes through, it'll be 10 stories, it'll be 12 stories. It'll get away from us. Once again, we're not Luddites. We're looking forward to William Street being a really lively, fabulous place. I hope it gets residential. I think it's it can be a real addition to the city. But
we have to please wind up.
Okay.
It's getting way beyond the... This
is hanging, the neighbourhood and the suburb is hanging in the balance. Don't let it get away, please. Thank you.
Okay, now, in whichever order you would prefer, Steve Tillinger? Or would you prefer to go first? Bruce Keane.
Thank you, councillors and officers. Is that on? That's all right? Yep.
Can you state your name and...
Bruce Keane, Director of Keane Planning. So we're the planning consultants representing the applicant. So I suppose just to put this in perspective, and I certainly understand the concerns that have been expressed by the residents. Obviously, we have a site that is effectively an island site. We've got the railway line at the back. We've got Stewart Street to the north, William Place to the south, and we've got William Street to the east. So it is a large site. It's almost 1,500 square metres. So yes, that does. We're saying that does give us a little bit more discretion to have a bigger building form. There is already approval for a 5-storey building at 21. There's also approval for I believe, a 6-storey building within a residential street in Marlborough Street, very close by. And there's also a 5-storey building fronting onto Nightingale Street immediately to the south. So the site is very well located. It's obviously the train station is immediately to the rear. We've got a tram station immediately to the north, and certainly the intention of this proposal is that there'll be a large proportion of the people using the site or having offices within the site will use public transport. The form of the development has been subject to a lot of discussion, and contrary to what has been presented today, it's not going to look like big boxes as been presented. We have 5 metre setback from the street. We've also agreed there's a 5 metre setback from Stewart Street. So we have a 27 metre wide width of the site that will present to the street. The Westbury Close residents, I understand that they will see this building, but we think the impact has been overstated. It is going to be 50 metres away. We believe that...
Excuse me, Mr Keane, can you just stop for a second? This is a formal meeting. You've all had a chance to talk. You need to... We just can't accept any comment from the gallery. The speaker has to be able to speak freely and without interruption. Thanks.
So we believe it will present as recessive. It is on the other side of the street. It's not immediately adjoining the rear of the residential properties. For example, the telecommunication tower is immediately at the rear, so that is quite visually dominant, but it is adjoining the residential property. Ours isn't. So in terms of presenting comparison with alterations, additions to a heritage building, it's actually part of the building. This is in another street, in another zone, in an area which is encouraged for development. There is a lot of old policy that talks about between 5 and up to 7 stories. We understand that, but that's going back to 2009. And certainly we believe that what we're presenting here is fair and reasonable and appropriate in terms of the context it's being presented in. It is an area where we want to encourage development. In terms of car parking, there is 72 spaces provided. We've also got 84 bike spaces. We've also got 6 electric charge bays. Yes, it doesn't fully meet the statutory planning requirements, but we would say neither it would need to in terms of its immediate context, and we want to actively encourage people to obviously take tram, train, bike, etc. So again, we think we put it to the council that it is an appropriate and reasonable proposal. It is one of the largest sites within the street. It's not going to be repeated unless, obviously, if there's other sites consolidated, then the same issues will be before council. But it's probably not fair or reasonable or balanced to present that the whole street is suddenly going to be, up to 8 stories. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, one last thing is just on terms of the shadow. So part of the discussion we had during the planning process was to ensure that there was shadow on the other side of the street, apart from in the mid to late afternoon, there is some shadow on the other side of the street, but obviously during the lunchtime, we've ensured that there's not any shadow cast. There's also minimal shadow apart from early in the morning to the residents to the west, so virtually no shadow cast to the closest residents.
Excuse me, just please, no comments from the gallery. It's just not fair. It's not right.
And probably the last point is public notices, from my memory, was undertaken in October and November, so I don't believe there was any public notice in December. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Tillinger, you can correct my pronunciation. Into the microphone, please.
I'm Steve Tillinger, Director at WMK Architecture, Principal Architect on this project. I guess firstly I feel a bit weird turning my back to the gallery because obviously I'm respectful of all their views and opinions, and I'm not ashamed, I guess, sitting here as the architect on this project. I guess taking to get everyone's commentary, I guess the visual collateral being presented today is, it hasn't been generated in terms of VCAT quality. That is both from those objecting, so it's all sort of, I guess, fear-mongering a process that we don't know, because we assume, and all we can do is that we've had a significant consultation process, not only with Council's design department, urban designers and all the other referral authorities, but there's been significant consultation with other stakeholders, including PTV. I think at the beginning of this project, everyone is looking at the outcome at the end. The project really for us as a design team, and really led by the developer, was about how we actually activate this part of William Street. Someone mentioned struggling. It is struggling. It is struggling, and it is unsafe. I feel unsafe walking along Balaclava Walk at points, and this is genuine. I know there's a few giggles and stuff, but believe me, who will walk down there at midnight? So for us to look at this site, that's now with the additional accumulation, is almost like an island site, encased with 3 streets, a large footprint that will be unrivalled along William Street in a transport hub node near Balaclava Station. What's being missed is the connections that are being created by the developer on their own land to connect Balaclava Walk, to create enhanced passive and active surveillance of that area, and to bring people into it, whether that be through the office accommodation and all the other uses, but it's actually promoting more activity, enhancing people's experience of that space. And yes, the built form is the built form. This isn't a case of we're going for this and we're not going to consult with anyone. We've been through an extensive consultation process with Council's urban design team, which has led us to the point where the officer recommendation was made. The data in our reports are factual in terms of the shadow studies, etc. We can't do anything more than that. I guess we are obliged as professionals to provide professional quality factual data. So that's in the drawings, and I guess that's what the officers have made a recommendation on. In addition to that, the overall form and the architecture, that's why sometimes I wonder why being an architect is probably a long-term job, because it's subjective. How people view a building and a black box, etc. By no means have we provided, or through detailed design, we will provide a level of detail to the architecture, to the fenestration. Everyone sees a black box, but to me I'm seeing all the details and the extrusions and the depths in profile that have been engineered as part of our environmental sort of analysis. The glazing and the exact coefficient of the glazing hasn't been detailed because we need to go through the environmental performance to work out what the heat loads are, etc. I guess what I'm saying is there are items within the application that will naturally evolve, and hand on heart, we are basically prepared to work with and provide whatever information is required to assist in understanding. The height and bulk and, I guess, long-range views from heritage precincts are something that are more emotive-based. They're not actually, something that was substantiated or raised during the council meeting process. I guess whether you live in a heritage zone or not, and something obstructs your view in a long-range view, well, that's just something that's part of, I guess, evolution. And even at 5 stories, your view or that your skyline above your backyard from Westbury Close, you'll be seeing the building. So it's a case of quality and quantity. And I think for us, we stand by the development. We stand by what it's going to do apart from just the built form and this part of Balaclava. And I think that through the process and the consultation that we've been through, officer support being sort of granted or put forward is also a sign and testament to that collegiate process. That's all I've got to say, really. Yeah.
Thank you very much, then.
Thanks.
Is Elizabeth Sylvester just arrived? Are you wanting to make a submission here, a verbal submission? Could you do it now? We'll just tack it on at the end. That'll be great. Got 3 minutes, please.
Hi, sorry.
Congratulations on your timing for that. Yeah.
Thank you. Look, just a brief introduction. My name's Elizabeth Hurst. For the last 2 years, I've been the Environment Auditor on behalf of the state for the $6 billion Westgate Tunnel project. So I've been in charge of environmental compliance and planning compliance for that large project. I've also been involved in assessing and completing a number of planning applications for large industrial premises. So I suppose I've just got really one clear statement, and I'm happy to take questions. The bottom line is that this application doesn't have sufficient technical assessments for you guys to make a sound planning decision, namely an air quality assessment, a operational noise assessment in particular, and you would expect that these assessments would be undertaken as part of the planning application, not as a condition of the planning permit. And the reason for that is that the risk is much higher for an industrial premises. I do have a number of other concerns about the application of best practice around consultation. It's been woefully inadequate, as I'm sure has been raised by my colleagues behind me, but I'm very happy to take any particular questions on that point. Sorry, I've just been running, so.
Thank you very much. We have a question. No, we don't.
No?
But we will ask officers questions on your behalf. Okay. Thank you very much for all of that. Councillors, do we have questions for officers? Councillor Simic.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone who's come to present tonight. I'd like to kick off. I think there will be a range of questions tonight, but really asking a question about the community consultation that took place. We've heard significant dissatisfaction around the process, and quite a number of people who've said that they haven't been notified, and there's a petition being passed around. If officers could really set out how broad the consultation was and where it was directed, and why it is that some people weren't notified.
Through the Chair. So advertising was undertaken in accordance with the Planning and Environment Act.
Could you speak up a tiny bit? We just need to get closer to the mic.
So advertising was undertaken in accordance with the Planning and Environment Act, which includes all adjoining sites, and for a development of the scale, we consult or advertise a lot wider. So we did 43 letters to surrounding properties, 5 site notices, and it was commenced on the 17th of October.
Councillor Boss.
Just to follow up to that question, the Westies over the other side of the railway line, would they have been included in that mail drop? Normally we do see where the letter goes to. I didn't see it in our papers.
That would be Nightingale Street would be one of them.
Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Borg.
We do have, what we normally provide is not who's been notified. What we normally provide is who has objected. We have a map that lists the objectors, and in this case, I understand we have 23 objectors and 8 supporters for the application, and that is provided towards the end of the document. So that doesn't list the people we've notified, but it lists the people who have objected.
There's no more time for questions from. Yes, Mr. McClellan. Yes, please continue.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the residents on Westbury Close didn't receive notice. They're removed far beyond an adjoining property.
Excuse me.
So the Planning and Environment Act does not.
Please
require.
let everybody. Just 1 second. Everybody has a time to talk. It's a formal meeting. It's democracy. You've got to allow each person to have their time and not interrupt them. We've given you extra. I'll be extra generous time before. And now we've got officers that are being asked formal questions that need to be able to give their answers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, through you, basically the Planning and Environment Act states that you only need to notify immediately adjoining properties. In this instance, Westbury Close is well removed over a street away from the subject site, so letters weren't sent to those properties. However, Council has undertaken its duties in requirement with the Planning and Environment Act.
Councillor Voss, you want to continue that line? No. Councillor Crawford.
Wasn't there a consult held with either residents or objectors in December? And were they from, do you generally know, were they just from William Street or from surrounding areas?
Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we did have a consultation meeting in December, attended by several of the objectors. I'm sorry I don't have the list on me at the minute, but I believe there were residents from Westbury Close at that meeting.
Councillor Baxter.
Sorry to keep harping on the same topic, but having heard from some people who live in the southern section of William Street, below the where it's closed off, so they say that they weren't notified. So, understanding that Westbury Close weren't specifically notified, what about William Street south of where it was closed off?
Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Mr. Chair. It looks like we gave notice up to 22 William Street. So that's going on the other side. It also looks like so I'm just going to the extremities here, just for your benefit. From 15 William Street. Through to 30, 32 William Street through to 38, and 3 William Place was also included in there. Basically, as stated previously, we went above and beyond what the requirements of the Planning and Environment Act are to give notice.
Look, excuse me, we've got officers giving technical, honest answers to the questions that have been asked. It's no point in making it harder for them. They're just telling us the facts to the answers to the questions that we're asking them.
Can I, through you, Mr. Chair, may I also add to what Mr. McClellan has indicated is that Council has to be very responsible as a responsible authority in terms of how broad it goes in terms of its public notification. There is an appeal provision. If the applicant believes Council has gone too far, they can take that matter and challenge the breadth of advertising to VCAT. So we do have to be responsible and moderate what we do in line with what the requirements are of the legislation.
Councillor Voss.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to query with the officers what the standing of the document that was presented, the legal document of understanding was. What is the standing of that document for this particular planning meeting?
Through you, Mr. Chair, are you referring to the structure plan? Is that what we're talking about, the Carlisle Streets?
No, it was referred to as not a petition, but there's a list of people that...
that was tabled.
I might seek some advice, won't be a moment.
Thank you.
We'll come back to that. Councillor Simic.
In the meantime, can I just ask a question around the height that's been proposed? Around the height that's been proposed, there's a range of comments made about policy and the planning scheme and different requirements. Can officers really clearly outline what the height requirements for the area are and how the proposal fits in within those requirements, or doesn't?
Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Mr. Chair. There are no specific height controls on this site, as there are elsewhere in the Carlisle Street Activity Centre through a design and development overlay. As some of the objectives have alluded to, that work hasn't been undertaken at this site yet. So what we do have is an urban design framework, which basically provides guidance on what would be considered appropriate built form. As we've heard, that policy or that design guideline basically outlines that 5 stories is the preferred maximum. That is not a mandatory control, so therefore we're guided by the other requirements of the urban design guideline, and the officer's report clearly articulates the reasons as to why officers think that's acceptable in this instance.
Councillor Voss. Sorry. Councillor Baxter. Let's share it around.
Okay. Thank you for your fairness, Chair. I have a question around the zoning of 1 Penny Lane. I don't know whether the officers will have that information on them right now, but we did have someone here say that, you know, the report specifically talks about not having to meet certain requirements of overshadowing because of the zoning of the areas on Penny Lane, and I'd just like to get some clarity because we did have someone here say that they are zoned residential on Penny Lane. So someone's wrong.
Thanks, Councillor, and through you, Mr. Chair. I've just quickly looked at the shadowing diagrams and identified where 1 Penny Lane is, and the shadow diagrams confirm that there will be no shadow cast upon 1 Penny Lane.
Councillor Voss.
Just to follow up to that, so you're confirming that there will be no material difference if it was zoned residential?
Correct, through you, Mr. Chair. There is no overshadowing indicated on the shadow diagrams to that property.
Councillor Goss, continuing with that. Are you continuing with that? Yep.
No, different question.
Councillor Baxter. We'll go to Councillor Baxter.
Sorry, Councillor Voss. My question is about the technical reports referred to by the final speaker. So the air pollution and noise pollution. So is it common practice to require these through condition rather than requiring them prior to bringing the report? You know, what's the go there?
Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Mr. Chair. Planning applications require a range of reports and documentation to be provided in support of the application. In this instance, there is no mandatory requirement for those reports to be given to Council to make its assessment. I would remind the Council that this application has been appealed and will be decided by the Tribunal. So tonight we are making a position, we're not making a decision. Because of the way, because of the way that the system works with VCAT, we're required to basically make a position before that hearing. So we're here today with the information that's been provided to us, making a recommendation. Officers believe that there is appropriate information for us to make a decision, and the application has been referred to the EPA, who do not object to the application.
Councillor Simic.
I just want to ask a process question around this progressing to VCAT. If, for example, we were to move an alternate recommendation tonight, which is a refusal, how would that, what sort of impact would that have at a VCAT proceeding, as opposed to a recommendation like this, where there's quite a number of conditions set out, which would need to be taken into consideration? Would that give more guiding principles to VCAD, for example?
Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Chair. This is now a public document, officer's recommendation. If council were of the opinion to not agree with the officer's recommendation and refuse the proposal, then council would go to that hearing supporting council's decision for a refusal. That said, the report is obviously public and it's an officer's recommendation, so that would be made available to all parties.
Councillor Gross.
So, for me, one of the critical issues is the urban design framework in the Carlisle Street Activities Centre Structure Plan. It's a venerable document, but it does unambiguously say 5 stories. So could you just talk to us about the role of the urban design framework in that structure plan and those guidelines? What is the weight of that plan, and why is it that officers thought that it had less weight than perhaps other people might think?
Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Mr. Chair. There are a range of design requirements within the urban design framework that help to guide development. Again, I don't intend to take you through all of them. They're outlined in the officer's report, and the officer's report is quite clear in its reasons as to why the officers believe that the development is appropriate. The urban design framework is a reference document within the planning scheme, so it has weight. It is to be relied on and will be relied on, I've no doubt, at the tribunal hearing. Officers have assessed the application on its merits, taking into consideration the specific design framework that is placed out there in guidelines, and has made a recommendation that they believe it's an acceptable outcome.
Yeah, look, it's just such it's just so difficult for someone like me, who's a member of the planning laity, to have what seemingly is quite unambiguous, and then but we get expert advice saying it doesn't have that weight. So could you explain to me why it wouldn't have weight? What are other factors which would mean that that 5-story limit can be ignored?
Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Mr. Chair.
Sorry to ask such a meandering question.
So it does have weight. No one said we definitely haven't said it hasn't got any weight. It is a reference document within the planning scheme, so it provides urban design guidance as to what would be an appropriate outcome from a built form perspective, as amongst other things, on this site. So as part of that urban design framework, there are design requirements built into that. As I said, I don't want to go through all of them item by item, and we'll be here for a long time. The officer report does outline those design requirements. They speak to things like street wall heights, overall heights, setbacks from streets. So there are a range of factors. Why do officers believe that this is an appropriate development in this instance, given the design framework we have to work with? For several reasons. The site is considered to be well located. It's a large site. It is an island site with only one interface with another property. We believe that there is a lot of justification for 8 stories, hence the report has suggested so.
I'm going to ask a question that follows directly from Councillor Gross's. Mr. Keane said seemed to be citing something from that framework scheme that was. He said it said 5 or up to 7 stories. Or I'm not quite sure what he said, but it was the words 5 or up to 7 stories was cited. Is that something? Is that contained somewhere in our planning scheme there or not?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. yes, it is. It does anticipate extra development. However, they are caveated with requirements to be set back from the street. Again, the officer's report does outline and speak to this matter and acknowledges that, albeit the proposal doesn't comply with those setback requirements for a high built form above 5 stories, that there is enough justification for the proposal.
Councillor Bond.
One of the conditions you've got here, condition 1E, removal of works outside the title boundaries, excluding the canopies to Stewart Street and William Street. I understand the purpose of the William Street canopy. It's an entrance to the building. But there's another canopy on the, it would be the northwest side of the building. The Stewart and, I guess, Balaclava Walk is the corner. You're not recommending that removal, and it appears to overhang the public realm, and much of it looks to be positioned outside the title boundary. What's your reasoning for suggesting or recommending the retention of that particular architectural feature, I guess is the correct term for it? And what's the functionality of that architectural feature that requires it to, well, I guess not just partially but completely overhang some of the public realm in that location?
Thank you, Councillor. Sorry, should you just confirm where that is? I'm just had to pull my plans up.
It's page 83 on my papers here. Attachment 1, TP 402 it looks like.
Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Mr. Chair. The requirement for the removal, so the requirement is for removal of the works outside the title boundaries, excluding the canopies to Stewart Street and William Street. The reason behind this is VicTrack have not consented to any extensions beyond the title boundary into their land.
But by saying removal of works excluding the canopies, that suggests to me you intend to retain those canopies.
No, through you, Mr. Chair, the canopies, so the canopies to Stewart and William are proposed to be kept for pedestrian and amenity reasons.
And that was my question. What's the purpose? Why would you? I understand the one on William Street is an entrance to the building. It's a little bit of a portico, an awning at the front. But what's the functionality or the purpose of the one at the rear, which overhangs Balaclava Walk on one side and Stewart Street on the other side? Why have we given people permission to overhang the public realm outside of their title boundary in that particular location?
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Chair. Sorry, I'll just confirm what you're talking about. Along Stewart Street and William Street, that they're council roads. So officers have no issue with the overhang there. To the rear along Balaclava Walk, that's VicTrack land, and VicTrack have not provided permission to do so at this stage. So the intent of the condition is to remove the overhang to Balaclava Walk, but still to allow the overhang on Stewart Street and William Street. That section there along Stewart Street is actually a pedestrian entrance that would lead up to Balaclava Walk or to the rear of the building. You will see that there are conditions within the permit, the proposal, to allow for further discussions with VicTrack, who haven't provided their final okay on the proposal at this stage.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Just where is the rubbish collected from this property? Are you able to?
Through you, Mr. Chair. It's from the basement within, there's a spot for 2 of the electric charging points for the waste truck to turn around. So collection would be within the basement.
One of the reasons I ask is there any chance that a rubbish truck or a removalist truck, for example, would hit that overhang?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's on the other side of the building, I believe. The vehicle access is from William Place.
So there are no trucks allowed down that street?
Have you got an answer for that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, not for the purposes of waste collection.
Right.
Sorry, you're making a mockery of that. My question, I also said removalist trucks as well, or any truck going down that street.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the overhang is over the footpath, so I'd say there's no chance that the truck's going to hit it.
Councillor Bond.
Just coming back to that particular location at what would be the northwest corner, your next condition down after E is F, deletion of any doors that open out beyond the west property boundary unless consent is obtained from the relevant land managers. Is that a reference to these doors here we see on the image on the screen that open out to the west, or is there other doors along that west-facing wall/boundary that condition is referring to?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, that's correct, Councillor. That's those doors there.
So through you, Mr. Chair, if in the event those particular doors are removed, would that not then make the awning above redundant? Do the two not go hand in hand? If one gets removed, should the other not go also? And we protect the overhang of the public realm for whatever purpose it may have at some point in time in the future?
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Mr. Chair. So if you're looking at the plan there, what the condition requires is the overhang onto Balaclava Walk to be removed, because we don't have the jurisdiction to allow it. It's Vic Track land, it's not council land. So the doors immediately below it are also being required to be removed because they also protrude beyond the tidal boundary. If you're looking at the canopy along the Stewart Street side, that would be retained because there is no reason for it to not be approved, and it provides amenity for access into the site. Now, it is somewhat confusing because Vic Track haven't allowed or provided permission yet to be able to integrate the whole public works into this proposal. However, conditions have been drafted to allow for those conversations to happen subsequent to if a permit's issued.
Councillor Bond again.
And would those conversations involve council? Because my view is that opening that up to Balaclava Walk would be a good thing. Having people being able to access there directly onto the station would have benefits. Would council be part of that conversation, or would that just be between the developer and Vic Track to resolve and have nothing to do with us?
Thank you, Councillor. And through you, Mr. Chair, council would be involved. It's a condition of council's permit, so we remain involved. And officers are highly supportive of activation along there. It's just that we weren't able to provide it because Vic Track didn't allow it.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, can I add to Mr. McClelland's responses? Condition 13 refers to a public realm plan that will be to the satisfaction of the responsible authority in Vic Track. And what it does, it provides some flexibility that if this permit is issued, that there's an opportunity for them to continue to negotiate with Vic Track and council in terms of how that's used. So we totally agree with you, Councillor Bond, that it's a sensible outcome, but we create some surveillance of that lane as well.
Councillor Crawford.
I actually have two questions. I'll just ask the first one. So early in the slides, we saw a big black box. Was that accurate in terms of the sizing? Because it looks quite different to this, like in terms of the actual dimensions. Firstly, if I could ask that.
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Mr. Chair. No, those are not accurate diagrams of the proposed building.
And can you explain to me there, I guess there's a fear, there seemed to be a fear around that if this building was to be approved, that would mean all of it would become the same height or boxed in. I guess I'm asking because usually buildings have to respond to whatever's it phases down. Would that be likely to happen, or does precedent count at all?
Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Mr Chair. That's correct. Each site and application is considered in its own merit. Each site is different. As the applicant alluded to, should other properties along William Street consolidate and a site of a similar size was to be before council, then there may be a similar application. However, the likelihood is, and based on planning merit, is that precedent doesn't hold sway. We look at each application on its merit, and therefore I would be suggesting that that's unlikely.
Yes, Councillor Crawford.
I just want to clarify. So at the moment, given where we have with the structure plan, there is no height limit. So if it goes to VCAT, well, it is going to VCAT. There is no height limit currently that is mandatory.
Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Mr Chair. That's correct. There is no mandatory height limit.
My next question is regard to parking. So like residential, when it becomes a new build, would they, if we were to permit the street, which we, as we grow as a city and have limited spacing, would that mean that any employees of that building would never be able to get a street parking permit as it is in residential?
Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Mr Chair. That's correct. Occupants of this development would not be eligible.
Any other councillors? I've got some questions I need to ask myself, but Councillor Voss.
I'm just wondering if the officers have any answers from governance on the standing of that document yet.
Through you, Mr Chair, yes, we have. So this document that was presented this evening has around approximately 50 signatures of people who say they haven't received any information. So it's advisory information at this stage. This matter is to determine Council's position on the upcoming VCAT administration hearing. So the people that have put their names down on this document could be a party to that appeal that's been considered at VCAT.
Okay, I've just got a couple of questions myself. I noticed that in one of the plans, the basement plan, there is a section of visitors parking. Can you tell us how much visitors, an officer tell us how much visitors parking there is, and whether that complies or exceeds or falls short of any requirement? Or am I wrong?
Through you, Mr Chair, can you point out where the visitor spaces are, sorry?
I believe it's in one of the basement plans, and it's sort of located in the middle, or am I might be wrong. It's always it's possible, and I might be embarrassed because it might be in another building. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure it was this one. That's why I wrote it down, but I might be wrong.
Through you, Mr Chairman, the report is very explicit that there is a significant shortfall in car parking, and that does go through the report, and it does provide a justification in discussion with Council's traffic engineers that there is sufficient to cater for this development. Also, the fact that there has been a green travel plan prepared to support the development as well. In addition, that there is, from my recollection, double the amount of bicycle parking spaces required by the planning scheme as part of this application.
I'm going to retract
that
question. So I think that's a good enough answer for me at the moment. I think I've got something wrong there. If you're not aware of it, it's not there, I'm sure. Another question. I'm concerned about the impact on streetscapes and local streetscapes around the place, and I'm wondering if there is actually a local street which is actually on axis with the building, like one of the ones in the west. or whether there is actually a street which the building actually appears right smack at the end of it, rather than across houses and roofs and gardens and things. Is there one? I just can't see it on the map myself.
Through Mr. Chair, Rosamond Street has a direct. However, there is the train station in between the street and the site. Is that what you're?
I'm just wondering if there is a street that actually. I can't ask it any other way. I'd just like to look at a map. Actually, is it possible to look at a general locale sort of map?
Mr. Chair, Rosamond Street runs into what would be the subject site if there were not the presence of the train station in between. Is that?
Okay, and so which is the subject site in this plan? Okay. So Rosamond Street, is there a view? Is in the assessment of this in terms of urban design? Is there actually a view being presented of the effect on Rosamond Street?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't believe there is a one on file that we would have on the screen now. I mean, I'm interested. I would be interested in it to see how bad it is, or whether the station is already blocking out that sort of parcel of air.
But if it's not available, it's not available at the moment.
Through Mr. Chair, I don't believe we have that available to us.
Okay, I've still got one or two more questions. It was said in that the current zoning, Industrial 3, is supposed to be a buffer zone. What's the status of Industrial 3 rather than straight industrial, or Industrial 1 or 2?
Through you, Mr. Chair, industrial zones are used in a way for grouping areas with similar characteristics. The zoning here in this instance is Industrial 3. It's different to Industrial 1, Industrial 2. Therefore, the planning scheme would allow for different uses as of right, or requiring a permit, or perhaps prohibited. What we need to be aware of is that the zoning of the land doesn't set the built form outcomes. The policies that are based in the scheme do that, and that's what we're looking to in terms of guidance for built form in this instance.
And my last one, the mention in the framework of that was cited by one of the objectors, saying that pure office use is discouraged. Is that something which is somewhere there, and how is that interpreted in this case?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is within the policy. However, officers suggest that there is a microbrewery as part of this proposal, so it's not purely an office development. There is industrial included.
I think that's done with my questions now. Councillor Crawford.
I'm just trying to understand. So, in the background from Westbury Close, we will see the building if it were to pass. What is with heritage and that? What is the rules? I'm just trying to get my head around. Is that allowed? Even I know the street itself has the heritage overlay, but what does it mean in the distance?
Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Mr. Chair. The subject site is not covered by a heritage overlay. The adjoining sites are, so the heritage policy, as it would apply to a site within the heritage overlay, does not apply in this instance.
Councillor Voss.
Thank you, Chair. If council was of a mind, as Councillor Gross mentioned earlier, to reduce the height of the building, 1, 2, 3, I don't know. Is there a particular story that would be appropriate to remove?
Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Mr. Chair. Assuming that the 5 metre setback were provided to Stewart Street, the tower floor plate is fairly consistent up the building, so that would be a matter for the applicant to look at. However, I can't see why there would be an issue with a particular floor. I think the intent would be for the overall height to be a maximum.
Any further questions? So, no. No, I'm afraid we just don't. I'm afraid it's not allowed. We do stick to the formal rules. It's a formal set out, and I'm afraid it's not allowed. We've all had a chance to put questions, and that's all. And your question, I'm sure, is implicit in what has been asked before. No.
Point of order, Chair.
No.
We have a meeting process, and we have to stick to that process, Chair.
I'm afraid this applies to every meeting we do. Once everybody has had an opportunity to say their piece, it's not a further debate. It is actually an opportunity for people to say their piece in order, and that's the way it is. And we do stick to the rules because that's the formalised function of a meeting like this, I'm afraid. No.
Point of order.
Excuse me, that's completely irrelevant. Our planning officers are our planning officers. It's not a debate, and I'm not going to debate it. I'm not going to debate it. I gave everybody on your side much more time than we said we would, and a few of them spoke for less, which was thankful. Okay, we're going to move now. Have we got a motion?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I wasn't sure whether someone was wanting to put the officer's recommendation or not. I do have an alternate motion to put, if that's all right. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you not hear me?
Okay. Councillor Baxter, off you go.
All right. So my alternative motion is essentially the same as the officer's recommendation with the following change. Amended plans required. 1B, the deletion of one level of the proposed tower resulting in a reduction to a maximum 7 stories.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Bond. Councillor Baxter, would you like to speak to your motion?
I would. Look, I'd first like to thank the members of the community that come here to say things. I understand that council meeting procedures are somewhat arcane and don't make a whole lot of sense. But I certainly sympathise with the chair who has to follow them. You know, there's a time for people to speak, and then we go into debate, and then no one can say anything from the gallery, and that's sort of how it is. But I can understand why that would be, you know, difficult to understand for people who don't sit here and do this every week like some of us have to. So that's very frustrating, and I get that, and I sort of thank you for your patience in dealing with that. I'm putting this motion essentially because we have some difficulty in this area where we have a plan that talks about 5 stories as being preferred, but no mandatory height controls, that because of whether through oversight over the years or through a lack of priority, the strategic and policy work to put those mandatory controls on this particular area, as there are for everywhere around it, was not done. However, that doesn't mean that the sky is the limit. So obviously, the applicants came in with a certain proposal, and the officers have come to 8 as what they feel is appropriate. I've had a look at all of these things, listened to members of the community, looked at how this would affect the skyline, which, as has been stated, is generally dominated by the train line and the trees. That's what our suburb is about. And it's what I see every day as I walk outside my house, which is just around the corner from here. So I feel that 7 is, in my feeling, appropriate. It is above the 5 that was talked about, but I feel that in the absence of mandatory controls, there should be an understanding that we're going to have to compromise in that respect, particularly as this is going to VCAT. But I think that 7 is just a more appropriate middle ground to land on in that respect. And what I'm hoping is that this will be, in all other respects, a good development that will spark some of that good development that we've talked about this area, and the change that William Street is going to go through. And hopefully we will be able to do some of that strategic work so that we can start to have a bit stronger controls in shaping what that's going to look like. So I guess the other thing I wanted to talk about was, no, look, that's probably it. I think there are some other people that are going to talk about things, but I understand that some people are going to be probably disappointed with this motion, and we'll see whether it gets up or not, but I think that that's probably where we'll hope to end up.
Councillor Bond, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr Chair. Just briefly, this is a change to your area, and a big change to your area, and we're finding right across our entire city we are dealing with change like this, and especially in Port Phillip we have very limited opportunity to go out, so all our change seems to go up. It is a light industrial area. There are no immediately adjacent residential properties, excepting that there are residential properties within 30-40 metres of this particular location. We as a council recently approved a 6-storey residential property immediately the other side of Balaclava train station. It did have single-storey residential properties immediately across the road and immediately next door to it. And we as a council felt that 6 was appropriate in that location. In this location without the immediately surrounding residential, 7 is probably an appropriate height limit here. I know the original application was for 10, which I think most of us as councillors would see was probably too high, but 7 is certainly a reasonable outcome here. It does change the nature of this particular area with the extra height there. Hopefully it is a good outcome with, I think, some much needed not residential, but some office space in this particular area, which gives Balaclava, Carlisle Street a much needed daytime economy. All those people will be down there assisting those shops down here, and we constantly hear from traders down there that they do need additional daytime support. And the addition of a microbrewery, it's certainly unique. I don't think we've got one anyway south of City Road. There's certainly a couple up in the industrial area of Port Melbourne, so it's something different, this area, and will bring different people and different activities to this area. So I think there are some positives here. I know some of you are probably disappointed with the height, but it's often not always about the height. It's about the use of the building and what the use of the building can bring to the neighbouring area. We are setting back the front on William Street and the side on Stewart Street. So, it's not the great big wall-to-wall monstrosity that some may have imagined, or potentially it could have been. So, we sit here and look at, all right, if we were to knock this back, on what grounds would we knock it back? I can't think of anything where it breaches the local planning scheme. The 5 storeys is not a mandatory. The state government very, very rarely gives us mandatory height limits. They're all discretionary, and unfortunately when you talk about a discretionary height limit, it generally means 1 or 2 stories higher is what VCAT will approve in this area. And I think that would be the case here. A discretionary 5-storey, VCAT would have no issues granting 6 or 7 given this, the location, and it's light industrial located right next to a train station. This is a sort of location where the state government is pushing for development to occur. So yeah, as I said, I will be supporting this on the basis that if you take aside the height and look at the rest of the building, it is a very well-designed building. I think it's an attractive building to look at. Makes good use of the location. Whenever you want to step in, David.
Excuse me, just no comments from the gallery, please. We have time for everybody to have their say, and it's been said in public. You need to listen to it because this is what everybody is saying.
Yeah, good on you. I'll finish up there, but I will be supporting this particular motion.
Councillor Simic.
This is a particularly difficult decision that's come to us from probably one of the more difficult planning decisions we've had to make on our time at council. One of the problems with planning that's bothered me in my time at council is very often the things that people come and talk to us about in these meetings that they're concerned about and worried about are things that have been decided some time ago. So what I mean by that is that we have an existing planning scheme, we have policies, we have rules, we have EPA regulation that we have to adhere to and abide by. As councillors, we take on a semi-judicial role in planning decisions where we do have to look at each application and assess it against all of those rules that we are bound by as a council. One of the difficulties I've seen on council as well is often when we refuse applications and when they go to VCAT, VCAT will very often approve things usually beyond what I think council is willing to approve because they're also bound by the same rules. In this instance, I agree with statements that have been made earlier that there's very little that actually holds us in a position where we can't approve this application. One of my concerns with refusing tonight's application is that if it goes to VCAT without additional commentary, as is prescribed in this recommendation that's been amended, the officer's recommendation that's been amended, which sets very specific conditions that the application has to adhere to. If a refusal goes to VCAT without any of that commentary, that indeed will actually end up with a much weaker outcome for our community in this area. So it is a very difficult decision for us to make tonight. I think that the amended 7 stories is more appropriate. Personally, I would like to see less stories in the area for the time being. And so I find myself making a difficult decision tonight, and I still haven't quite made up my mind, to be perfectly honest, but I do want to reassure people that we are listening to what the community is saying and really encourage people in future when there's planning scheme amendments that come before council. They're usually very long documents and quite boring documents, and very few people engage with them. But that's our opportunity as a community to actually set some of the rules in place which govern these decisions that we have to make in our planning committees. So I just wanted to explain and give some context to tonight's decision and what councillors are probably going through and considering in light of the commentary we've had from the community and also the applicants.
Councillor Gross.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. One of the things I really hate about planning is when you encounter seemingly unambiguous, straightforward statements that somehow don't apply. And the urban design framework in the Carlisle Street activity said to structure plan tells me 2 things. First of all, the very name of the document is an example of the complexity which planning inevitably involves. And secondly, it seems completely unambiguous to me at 5 stories. But I've been advised, we've all been advised by our expert planners that this is now a rather old document and that things have changed. Notwithstanding that, I won't be supporting this because the community has to have some voice, and the voice of the community is to reject this application. The only thing I would say is that this is in VCAT now, and we've just heard that in the item before that our officers have an 87% success rate, and that one of the things that is about a VCAT process is that the officer's report is the one thing about a decision that does not die. It goes with the application to VCAT. So it's going to be highly persuasive. So I'm a bit squeamish about that. I don't want to be dishonest about the prospects of what will happen. I feel obliged to say 3 things. I hate the way seemingly unambiguous statements can be ignored in a planning process. I'm going to vote as I said, and I am going to say to everyone that the officer's report will have a persuasive power in VCAT that cannot be denied.
Councillor. Okay, I'll make a statement. When I started reading this, the report, and looking through the whole application, I was pretty excited by this building. I thought it was going to do everything right. It was going to introduce a lot of different, a multiplicity of uses. It's going to use existing buildings. It's going to activate the streets. It's going to do a whole lot of things, and I think most of my optimism is absolutely true at ground level and in the bottom half of the building. I am sort of disturbed at the top half of the building because it doesn't seem to express the sort of the hybrid idea of putting all sorts of uses and building forms together, and old and new and what have you. It does seem like a corporate, a bit of a corporate office block, and it is quite high and quite visible. And it bothers me that that it doesn't express all the things that I think that the architecture and the development itself is sort of aspiring to. So I certainly don't think, I don't feel in any way compelled to approve it as applied for. I think the proposal we have in front of us is actually a reduction in height to the proposal and a reduction in width to what was originally proposed. So the diagrams that you and the building and the representations you have, generally speaking, of the I think the 8-storey building and the full width building. What we're proposing is a story off the top and another story off the top. It was originally a 10-storey application, and a bay off the side of about the same sort of size. And I think it reduces the box on the top to a more manageable proportion. The other thing is that even though the architect says that, of course, well, this is true, that there's so much more detailing to do in the design process after the planning application, and that all of the more intense detailing and sort of the stuff that will give it quality is yet to happen. It's not realistic in this day and age, especially in areas which are surrounded by heritage areas, to say the details will come second. I think it's really necessary to put indicative design details, whether it's like lots and lots of shading or lots and lots of whatever you're going to do. You need to at least put indicative stuff like that on the application drawings, especially the renderings, for public view, and then amend them as design requires over and over. But you need to start with something which gives a general idea of the quality and the, I suppose, the sort of the look and feel of it. It looks to me like we've got a pretty plain, perfectly nice office block that looks like that is sitting on top of this fantastic part of the city, I think. So I'm not happy with it. I think I'm quite. I prefer it as even less at the moment, I think. But I think 7 is probably where we're going to get with VCAT, and hopefully VCAT might take it further and actually require or give guidance or direction on some of that detail. This building, I think the actual black box on top, I completely and utterly understand the need for a singular, simple shape on top of the complex sort of as-found bottom part of it, which is great. I think you've got to have that contrast, that's good. But it needs to be about aspiring to the future of environmental performance, like the shading or the greening of it or whatever. This building needs to express that. Or the idea of hybrid, where you've got all these different things happening. The basketball court on top, I think, is great, but it's right in the middle where you can't see it. I'd like to see it on the edge somewhere where you can see it, so that you know that this building is sort of a bit crazy and mixed up and sort of exciting and interesting. Ultimately, for the community to look at a building, I think in this day and age, we have to expect to be looking at new buildings in our areas, even if they are heritage areas. Even our heritage areas are going to have buildings on the horizon. But I do think that we can expect and we can demand that they are buildings worth looking at. And I don't think this top of this building has reached that yet. I think realistically, I think we need to take it to VCAT with the officer's recommendation here. Otherwise, we will lose all grip of it. So I'll be supporting it. Would you like to close? Councillor Crawford.
I know that we come here again and again in planning, and change is really hard. And change is really hard in this area because we have been designated a growth city council. And it's not easy for any of our residents, and it doesn't matter which ward it's in. It's really hard. I will be supporting the 7-storey motion as put by Councillor Baxter for these reasons. If there is no height limit, there is no use pretending that it'll go to VCAT and be kept at 5 or less. So I'm being realistic. I also think that in a time of growth, when it's not right next to residents, where it is a better place to put a piece of growth like this next to a train station, where there are less neighbours directly affected. I also think it is actually a good building, an interesting building in terms of the microbrewery to add to our area and helping this street thrive as retail goes through a radical change. No one likes the empty shops, and adding more people and more interesting things in this area could help Balaclava as a whole. It's not ideal. I'm not pretending that supporting this is ideal, but there are actually lots of good things about it. This is a much better place to put it than right next to someone's home. And I think, they're retaining the sawtooth shape of the building. There is a lot of good things in the building. I get that the height is the biggest problem, but reducing it a level makes a difference. So I will be supporting this recommendation.
Are there any further speakers? Councillor Baxter, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I've said, this is my neighbourhood and an area, this building I walk past every single day, either on the William Street side or the Balaclava Walk side, so I know the site very well, and I think that, like most people, I would have been quite happy with this building just as it is, but 5 stories. I think probably most objectors probably would have been happy with that as well. Please don't clap me because I think you're unhappy with my decision. So that's what I would have been happy with, and
Excuse me, please.
So what I wish is that the precinct plan that said 5 stories had actually said mandatory 5 stories, and it didn't.
Sorry. Please let Councillor Baxter continue.
Yeah, I hesitate to get into debate with the gallery, but planning scheme amendments aren't made by us. They may be prepared by us over a number of years, but they are made by the planning minister. So anyway, that's the sort of conundrum I've found myself in. The developers have asked for 10 stories, a plan that we find it difficult to enforce says 5, and I think that 7 is a reasonable compromise there. I definitely understand that people will be impacted by this, including myself, but when it comes to the pure decision-making duty here, or recommendation-making duty here, for us to simply say, does this comply with the planning scheme? I can say that this complies, and I think it complies a bit better than 8 stories would have. So there we go.
Okay, councillors, we're going to have a go for a vote. All those in favour? All those against? The motion is carried. Okay. We might take a short break. Let me at least announce it. We're going to do item number 6.2. No, we're just going to do this for a tick. We're just going to get this item. Sorry, we're going to do this item right now, the 6.2. And get that out of the way while the gallery clears. Could we? Excuse me. We can't have. We're still in the middle of a meeting. Thank you very much. Okay. Item 6.2: Statutory Planning Delegated Decisions Report, December 2019 and January 2020. There are no speakers on this particular item. And do we have any questions for officers? No? 6.2? It's 6.2, Statutory Planning Delegated Decisions Report, December 2019 to January 2020. And I'm stringing it along. Councillor Baxter, would you like to move it? You shall move it. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Crawford, would you like to speak to it? Councillor Crawford, would you like to speak to it? I don't think you can close to it if there's nothing to close. Councillor Baxter? Councillor Gross, are you wondering, are you a part of this council, or are you... I was just wandering around. Okay. So we have a recommendation in front of us, the officer's recommendation, and we shall now vote on it. All those in favour? All those against? Motion carried.
Can I call the division? Thank you, Councillor Brand.
Okay. Division called. All those in favour? All those against? All those against? Oh, I've got a list of names. Councillor Copsey, this will be a challenge. Councillor Copsey, Councillor Simic, Councillor Voss, Councillor Bond, Councillor Brand, Councillor Gross, Councillor Crawford and Councillor Baxter. All those against? I can't see any. I declare the motion carried unanimously. I suggest we take a small break. Councillors, our next item is Item 6.3, 245 to 247 and 249 to 251 Normanby Road, South Melbourne. We have nobody here to speak on it, so we have the opportunity now for questions to officers. Councillor Simic.
Can I move an alternate recommendation, please?
Hold on. You may, but I think I'll listen to some questions first. Councillor Voss.
Thank you. Just noticing that there's no applicant in the room. No? I didn't get an email.
That's interesting.
Oh.
Is that a question?
Sorry,
could you,
I'm just having a little conversation
here.
here.
Could you frame that as a
Notice
question?
there's no applicant in the room to talk to this item. Apparently I got an email, but I haven't read my emails since this afternoon. Were you able to speak to them about which housing provider they spoke to in terms of them getting a response that there was no housing providers able to take up their offer?
Through the Chair. So Council is a referral as part of this application. So the Minister, the Department, so DELP is the responsible authority for this application. So we have been advised through DELP that they did request information from the applicant regarding who they approached in respect of providing affordable housing on the site. The response that we have received from the department is that they were not furnished with that information. They got a response, and the response is similar to what was stated in the email which was sent this afternoon. They advised that they approached and had several discussions with different housing associations and housing providers, and it has become apparent that there is a general reluctance from them to commit, given that there is insufficient funds to purchase dwellings, even with a discount, or there are concerns about ongoing costs associated with the dwellings and multi-residential developments.
Any further questions for officers? No? Then Councillor Simic, would you like to move what you want to move?
So that's an officer's motion. This is the officer's motion. That's the officer's motion, and the other one's alternative recommendation.
Councillor, hold on. Oh, you've got a question. I will take the question first. Councillor Crawford.
We did receive an email this afternoon from the planner, and it was saying, I didn't understand fully that they wanted to extend the 6 months where, after the demolition, that there was 6 months or 12 months instead of 6 months. Did anyone else get that email? Am I imagining it? So they have asked for a 12-month time period rather than the 6 months that's in the application to amend condition 14. Is that a reasonable, is that unusual, or 6 months the usual time frame that we would give after that demolition?
Through the Chair, Council officers have received that email as well. We acknowledge that they have requested 12 months. The condition that was put to Council was for 6 months. Council officers have no issues with extending it to 12 months.
Okay, so Councillor Simic, you're about to move something, but I'm going to be confused about whether it's an alternative motion or we're moving an alternative recommendation. No. Is this from the officers?
If I could provide some clarification through you,
okay.
Mr. Chairman, we have before us, the officers have prepared an alternate recommendation, which I've gone off. Which clarifies some of the language, so I can provide that, and we can also amend it to incorporate the 12 months requirement. So that would be the alternative recommendation from officers. If councillors have an alternative motion, they can put that to you following that. Yes.
Okay, Councillor Simic.
Hello. May I move an alternate recommendation, please?
Yes, you may.
6.3, which amends 3.3I and II. And also incorporates the officer's changes at 3.1.
So can you outline what your alternatives are here? You need to make sure this is right. Oh, sorry, I'm so fat. Councillor Voss.
I'd just like to have some clarity on exactly what Councillor Simic is moving as.
Yes, I've asked for that.
Read that out.
Mm-hmm. Councillor Simic, would you please clarify by reading out what the changes are that you're proposing, including the officer's recommended ones?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the opportunity to provide clarity. 3.1, under condition 14, amended to read, before the development starts, excluding demolition, bulk excavation and site preparation work, and works to remediate contained land, the permit holder must provide. So there's two changes, the addition of the word excluding and the addition of the word and the removal of the words but excluding. 3.1 also under a new condition to read, within 3 months of the demolition or removal of existing buildings or works on the land, the owner of the land must enter into an agreement with the responsible authority pursuant to section 173. So the addition of the words with the responsible authority pursuant to. Also, a new condition to read at E, landscaping of the site for the purposes of the public open space, and the addition of the words subject to a site assessment from a suitably qualified environmental professional in accordance with general practice note 30, potentially contaminated land, that the land is suitable for public open use. In addition, Chair, I am moving that we add to recommendation 3.3 and amend condition 20 to read at I, so adding the words that are there by a housing trust, registered housing association or housing provider approved by Port Phillip City Council. At 1, adding the words in perpetuity and taking out the words for a period not less than 20 or 30 years. Adding 3, which is also on the screen, which reads, the affordable housing dwellings provided for within this development and any subdivision thereof shall not be liable for any owner's corporation fees. I propose that at 3.3II we add an additional dot point at the end. If we just scroll down, that says, the affordable housing dwellings provided for within this development and any subdivision thereof shall not be liable for any owner's corporation fees. And also the next dot point, which says, in the event the permit holder is unable to achieve an arrangement in accordance with the condition to council satisfaction, the City of Port Phillip would be responsible for locating a housing association or housing provider. I also propose the addition of the words or a suitable alternative housing organisation, and that's also to add clarity and consistency. At IV, the additions of the words in the Fisherman's Bend urban renewal area. And I think there's also the at 60% of market value of dwellings offered take out but taken 60%. So there's a bit of an equation there, which has just been altered. And those are the recommended changes to the officer's motion. In my alternate recommendation.
I wonder, Councillor Simic, if I could just ask you on point condition 14, authority, where you've altered it to authority pursuant to section 173. If you would entertain on point A under that, if the land remains vacant for 12 months after completion, and in B, instead of 6 months, as discussed before by the officers, changing each of those 6 months to 12 months.
Can I thank you for putting that to me, Mr. Chair. Can I ask a point of clarification from the officers about the impact that would have?
No, I mean we don't have to now, but yep. Could an officer could you, Mr. Borg, could you clarify that?
I'm happy to clarify that through you, Mr. Chairman. It really would mean that it would provide them a little bit more time in terms of their demolition and the works they would need to do. So it wouldn't preclude them from the requirements, so to just give them a 6-month extension. But however, council doesn't need to provide that. That's a request that the applicant has made. So you don't have to agree to that.
Councillor Boss.
I'd just like to ask a further clarifying question. What's the normal usual time frame that we give applicants for this sort of activity?
Mr. Borg,
through you,
Mr. Guttridge.
Mr. Chair. This is not a typical condition. It's something particular to Fisherman's Bend, and to be honest, we have not done many of these. But in the development world of trying to, once you have permission and then trying to get documentation and so forth together for a project of this size, 6 or 12 months goes pretty quickly. It's not unusual for between something like demolition happening to facilitate contaminated land remediation and other matters to be done, but 12 months passes very quickly.
If I could add to Mr. Guttridge's comments, the basic principle really is to ensure that development occurs. And that's why we don't give a great period of time between demolition, where you do need a permit to undertake that, whether it's here or in a heritage area. So that's the rationale. But as Mr. Guttridge said, there's a lot of work to do with contamination reports, and I think that would be 12 months would not be unreasonable, but 6 months would get them to get a move on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And while I long to please you, I think in this instance I will stick to the 6 months for the sake of making sure that things happen quickly.
Councillor Voss. All right, sorry. Okay, we've got a motion. Councillor Voss will second that motion. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Simic?
I think this has been, we've talked about this development on several occasions now, and it's come back to us with a series of questions. I was quite concerned about the way that the affordable housing is proposed to be dealt with in this instance. I think it's really important for Council to make a very clear statement in this area, which is changing in Victoria at the moment and something that the state government's looking at. But we have to be very clear and consistent with our approach, which is also the same approach that we've taken through key policies that council subscribe to, like the In Our Backyard strategy, where we talk about the importance of housing being available in perpetuity. And so I support the overall motion, the officer's recommendation. I did think it was necessary to make a few changes and to be really clear on that point, so that officers have a really clear approach to any negotiations that happen beyond this point. So that's really the main change. There's also a few changes to the officer's recommendation that have been proposed, which tidy up some of the wording, and I hope that councillors will support this and take a strong stance tonight when it comes to the provision of affordable housing through these sorts of mechanisms and agreements.
Councillor Voss.
Thank you, Chair. So what we've been asked for tonight is to provide a position on this ministerial application, and I'm glad we've got the opportunity to do so. They're just requiring two small changes to a couple of the conditions. The first one being the environmental audit. I think 6 months is enough, and the reason I think so is because this particular application got in pretty early and if it was today that this application is coming to us, we'd have a completely different type of application going there. So I think they really need to get on and build what they want, otherwise it should be another application coming to us. So 6 months I think is enough. But on the second part, I concur with what Councillor Simic has outlined. It's really important that we start Fisherman's Bend the way that we want to end up, and that is to have all the developers and the people that are building in there investing in our community and taking responsibility for the community that are going to be living in there. And that is quite a diverse community that needs to live there. So this is a huge issue that we're facing, and we need to make sure that as many of the housing types in Fisherman's Bend are as affordable as possible. We need to have certainty, and that's why we'll keep pushing for our 6% that we want. And in fact, our council has a position on 20%, so we're comfortable with getting 6%, but we do want more than that to have a fully rounded community. So very happy to provide the support for this. I hope the development starts relatively soon. Currently it was a panel beaters and a wholesale warehouse, so imagine a whole new community living there, and in this capital city zone that is Fisherman's Bend. So I do appreciate the email that SJB have sent to us outlining their position and commentary around the condition 14 and 20. However, I was after some specific information around who they've actually contacted, because this actually does feed into, the certainty around affordable housing and what we need to do to make sure it does happen. So I am supportive of this recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, before we go any further, I just want to... I'm not sure that I can vote on this without some clarification on some technical issues. I think I'm asking myself and looking for some nods around the table if I could ask a couple of clarifying questions of officers of the effect of some of these changes. All right, I'll allow myself to do that. I think I can do that. Pardon? It's a long time going, this project. Councillor Bond, sorry to disappoint you. The change to the wording of perpetuity instead of the 20 or the 30 months. How does that affect our? I don't know where you can do this in public anyway. In terms of what we do in VCAT, in terms of strategy there, how does this affect? Oh, I don't know where we can do that. I'll leave that question out because I'm unsure about it. The no body corporate fees, is that something which is commonly understood, or is it completely against common practice to ensure that social housing has pays no body corporate fees?
In response to you, Mr. Chairman, we have had legal advice previously that it's a request we can put in. We actually have had acceptance in one development and a lot of pushback from lots of other developments. So we think we can put it in and it will be challenged, and we're happy to take the challenge on at VCAT.
Okay. And the bit where the 60% equation was changed in the grammar of it, I'm just wondering whether there's any material change in that or whether it's just a purely syntactical sort of change.
For you, Mr. Chair, it's a grammatical change, but made for clarity.
All right. Okay. If any other councillors need to ask technical questions, now's your opportunity. Otherwise, we'll proceed. We'll proceed. Any other speakers? Councillor Bond.
Yeah, I won't be supporting this. One of the reasons we are not getting the desired results that we would like down in Port Melbourne is because we keep trying to make every application down there some sort of magic solution, magic bullet solution to all of our problems. You know, every one of these developers has open space contributions. They've got DPC's developer contributions. We've got affordable housing targets, and now we want to waive body corporate fees. In the end, we're making these developments down here just unviable, which is why none of them are getting built. We can't just keep piling onto all these applications, all sorts of rules and regulations and requirements that generally just make these proposals financially unviable for every concerned. The only way they will ever meet all our requirements is to build the most low-cost, terrible, packing as many apartments, low-cost apartments as you can down there, and we wind up with some sort of terrible, terribly built planning zone down there, reminiscent of what South Bank has been over the last couple of years, which is not what we envision this site to be. But by continually putting these requirements in, we leave the developers with no alternative but to go down that path. The other thing I'm not happy with in there is that we have a conflict of interest to be putting into planning applications that we must approve who it is that they deal with their affordable housing and which group they must sign an agreement with, when we as a council have a large conflict of interest. Members of this council sit on boards of housing providers and housing associations. It's a conflict of interest. We shouldn't be forcing developers to have to get our approval, and of course there's an obligation on us to approve the housing association or community housing organisation that we of course have an interest in. It's a conflict and we shouldn't be forcing that onto these developers. Therefore I won't be supporting these changes or this application.
Point of order.
Point of order.
I believe that Councillor Bond was referring to me specifically in relation to his conflict of interest.
I can confirm, Councillor Simic, that yes, I was referring to you as being a member of a board of a housing association.
Can officers please clarify whether I have a conflict of interest in this instance?
Yes, I'd like somebody to look at that. How do we do that? Mr. Chick.
Under the Local Government Act, Councillor Simic, as an appointed person by council to the committee, to the Housing Association, does not have a conflict of interest, and that's specified in a section of the Act, the Local Government Act.
So, Chair, can I just clarify if Councillor Bond's been provided with this advice on several occasions previously already, why this is coming up as a comment tonight at a public meeting?
I'm happy to clarify. I'm of the view that by us forcing a developer to have to seek our approval when we have an interest in a housing association is, in my view, a conflict.
We're not going to go back and forth on this. I think it's a valid question. I think it's got a perfectly good answer, and I think we can leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your ruling.
What are we up to?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask Councillor Bond to retract the comments he's made about me having a conflict of interest in light of the officer's comments and explanation that there is no conflict of interest.
Mr. Chair, I believe we're going to leave it at that and move on.
I think it's. I do not see a problem in raising the question. We have an answer, which has repudiated the suggestion.
Mr. Chair, it's contrary to the code of conduct, which we've all subscribed to as councillors. That's the problem with it.
Then I suggest you lodge a code of conduct complaint.
I don't think we're going to go on with this. We're not going to go on with this. We're just going to proceed. We've got an answer which is completely clear. It has to be accepted by everybody. It's not wrong to ask a question that receives that answer. Any other councillors wanting to speak? Councillor Gross.
This is a difficult one for me because the changes we've made might lead to the problems that Councillor Bond has alluded to in making it unviable for any building to be built here, or they may not. I sort of don't know. I do know in the past I've been involved with housing projects, mainly legislative, and over time we killed housing with love. And so it's, I just want to say it's a very difficult issue because, but in one sense it isn't. It's going to the Minister. The Minister, who's also the Minister for Housing, will decide, and if the Minister thinks that it's so restrictive that it will in fact inhibit the provision of housing, then the Minister will say that. This is just recommendatory. But I think that it's a very difficult point to assess. I think Councillor Bond's point has veracity. I sort of don't know which way I'm going to vote, but yeah, I think that's something we have to think about. When do we kill housing with love?
Any other councillor comments? Any councillor would like to speak? None others? I will just have a word on that myself. I think the fact that we are not making a final decision ourselves here, we're putting our preferred position. It gives. Is it going to VCAT? No, this is the. This is the yes.
Providing some clarification through you, Mr. Chairman. It is a Section 72 amendment, so it's an amendment to an existing permit. We are providing commentary to the Minister, but the applicants also have a right to take the matter to VCAT, and the Minister also has a right to call the matter in from VCAT.
Okay, so we've got several filters on this. I think what is in Councillor Simich's motion is ideal. It's what we would like to argue, what we would want to argue. I think we acknowledge that there may have to be fallback positions. We acknowledge that we know that we are not the actual final decision maker on this. It's the Minister, or if not the Minister, VCAT, and they can certainly add their input into it, balance it as they would want to balance it, change things back. So I feel like it's a conflict to me, not so much about whether we're actually on the right balance, but whether we are balancing, not the right balance of how we deal with housing and what we demand of it, but whether we are putting our strongly preferred decision or our final decision, which is going to be unchangeable. And it's obviously not that. If it was that, we might actually try to take it to the sweetest point of a compromise. I think here we need to advocate the best outcome we think possible, and that's probably what we're doing. So that's why I'll be supporting it. Any other speakers? Okay, we'll put the motion. All those in favour? All those against? The motion's carried.
Can we have a division on that, please, Chair?
Division has been called for, so we'll vote again. All those in favour? Councillor Copsey, Councillor Simic, Councillor Voss, Councillor Brand, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Baxter. Those against? Councillor Bond and Councillor Gross. The motion's carried. Move on to the last item on our agenda, which is 20 to 28 Montague Street and 80 Munro Street, South Melbourne. We have no speakers for or against. We have the opportunity to ask officers questions. Nobody want to avail themselves of that question? Councillor Voss has indicated she'll be moving this. Councillor Copsey seconding. Councillor Voss, would you like to speak to your motion?
No.
Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak? There's nothing to close. We'll go to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? That's carried. Or I didn't see Councillor Simic's vote on that one. Right, okay. Unanimous. Unanimous vote. So that's been carried unanimously, and that's the end of that one. Now, is there any urgent business? Apparently not. Are there any confidential matters that need to be considered? Apparently not. There being no further business, I declare this meeting closed.